history patterns. A history of the 1940s. Bob Till You Drop. A history of the 1950s. I was a teenage gyroscope. A history of the 1960s. Bongos and sunglasses over easy. A history of the 1970s. Where did all these name tags come from? A history of the 1980s. Yes, Toto, we're back in Kansas again. History of the 1990s. When were we told that the alarm clock would be going off? A history of 20th century capitalism. Machines. Mind leading the blind. More machines. Where there's dust, there's industrialization. Machines. A history of Christianity in the 20th century. Missionary impossible. A history of advertising. Who needs to sell robots? We're already machines, well trained to need more machines. History of the 21st century thus far. Think about the consequences of terrorism, both from within and without. Consider how fear-based maneuvers from multiple sources affect both the individual and the entirety of all nation states.
we're going to start. Hello, everyone. So nice to see some familiar faces here, but I have to use these, so now I'm not going to see you at all. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of Paul's siblings. My name is Denise. My other brother Mark and my sister Suzette are here today, as well as Paul's nieces and nephews and some cousins too. Many of us have been mourning Paul's passing for 10 months now, but we are here today to celebrate Paul as we knew him, however we knew him, and to honor his memory. Perhaps his spirit is here with us today. This is exactly the type of event he would have loved to attend. His music playing, the people he felt connected to around him, appreciating his many talents and the kind of person he was. Each of you has had a different kind of relationship with him. Some of you were students, neighbors. Some of you had deeper relationships or have been friends and colleagues for decades. So whether you knew him for a day or for decades, I would like to thank you for being his friends, for supporting and inspiring him and challenging him over all that time. Some of you were his family for a while, so thank you for loving him. Maybe some of Paul's friends from afar are watching this on film. I acknowledge your presence in his life also. You were all meaningful to him. 3 friends who cannot be here today are Rob Lindsley, Mark Harris, and Ken Pickering. May they also rest in peace. I would like at this point to express a huge thank you to Victoria Gibson for organizing this event. She did a wonderful job. It's a very complicated event to plan, and she did it out of love. So thank you, Vicky, on behalf of Paul's family. So we are here actually to celebrate the fact that Paul survived cancer almost 45 years ago. He could have been given only 20 more years after that, or 10, but we had him for 44 years cancer-free. I am so grateful for that, and I bet you are too. I know it's never long enough, but in a bittersweet way, that is the silver lining. We knew him, and because he was a big part of our lives, he has left us the gift of amazing memories. I'm supposed to be here representing Paul's early life and early musical influences, but I wasn't there for the first 8 years of his life. But he was a beautiful baby. That is him on the left. He is sitting on our mom's knee, and that's a cousin in the back, and that's my brother Mark with our grandmother Nana. As a baby and little boy, Paul was exactly the same as he was in his adult years. Energetic, curious, intelligent, very loving, mischievous, and very determined. Look at him absorbing the world around him. I saw that same look on his face many times after only half an Americano. There's another one. Here he is raring to go. That's Mum holding him or taking him out of the outdoor playpen at the house at Beechwood. And here's another. Oh, back one. We'll get to this one. There we go. Here he is in his Athlone school uniform. I don't think he wore a uniform too much after that. And another on the right, a year or so older. When he was a young boy, he loved to go off on adventures in the neighborhood, exploring and playing games with neighbors together with my brother Mark. There was a kind of independence in being able to do that then, which suited Paul. The world didn't seem so dangerous. Doors were left unlocked, and in the summer, we could tell what time it was because of how the light changed. In fact, Paul was so adventurous that one night, in the middle of the night, I think he was about 8 or 9, he got up and snuck out the front of the house, got on his bike in his pajamas, and rode to the corner store 5 or 6 blocks away. That's a long way for a small boy at night. And when he got there, he woke up. He was sleep cycling. We had to put aluminum pie plates down around the front steps to wake us up if he tried that again. No alarms, no Apple Watches, just pie plates. He likely noticed how cool they sounded clanging together. Then go to the next one. Nope. Oh, yeah, that's right. No, that's right. Sorry. Yep, that's right. Here he is, around 10 years old, with the family. Oh, no, we need the one with the family. The one that yes, that's the one. That's Dad on the left and Paul beside him. Mom is holding me, and that's my brother Mark and my sister Suzette. Photos were so formal then. That's at Collingwood Place, a different house. This was a significant age for him. In our house, as young children, we heard a lot of classical music and some early jazz. We heard it at home and in the car on the way to school every day. That was our father's taste and his parents' taste before him. In my opinion, musical talent primarily came from our dad's side, although our mom's side certainly provided enough Celtic blood, you'd think we were all born doing a jig. But our grandfather, Horace Plimley, played with the Purcell String Quartet, and he and his wife, Connie, our grandmother, used to go hear the Vancouver Symphony, and then, after returning home, she would play it all again on her piano from memory. Our dad played the bass as a young man, and our house was full of lots of Beethoven, Bach, some Mozart, Debussy, eventually Duke Ellington, and lots of Frank Sinatra. I remember teenager Paul talking with Dad about Art Tatum and Duke Ellington a lot. But what about popular music when he was a young boy? Here's another photo of Paul around the age of 10. Nope. There he is. He's looking at me, and that's my sister. Around this time, he heard both the Beatles and the Beach Boys on the radio for the first time. We know how much he loved the Beatles, and in particular John Lennon, but Paul said that the harmonies of the Beach Boys moved and fascinated him at such a deep level that for the first time in his very young life, he realized what music could do, that it could transform our emotional state and lead us to a higher plane of existence in some way. He likely did not think about it in those words at that time, but he felt it. He said to me, he realized it could take away your pain. This was the first pivotal musical experience for Paul. He listened to them a lot, taking note of the harmonies, the carefully constructed variations in the verses, and most importantly, the lightness, the sweetness, and the happy feelings. Now, I don't have a picture of him at age 12 or 13. I searched and searched. So this is going to seem like a big jump. No, not this one, back one. That one. That's his high school McGee photo. But during that time, between 10 and this, when this picture was taken, he was still studying piano, but he was also learning about the world outside of the family. Paul always loved self-directed learning, and eventually he discovered Frank Zappa, and a little later Captain Beefheart, both which he used to play for me, but I was too young. I didn't understand any of it. Zappa was especially pivotal for Paul and his first experience with comedic rock satire. He shared the sentiments. Paul was naturally attracted to the rebellious spirit of the day and to all things that young people were not supposed to do. To use comedy as a metaphor, and comedy was extremely important to Paul, you might say that he graduated from the Three Stooges to Monty Python and then to Lenny Bruce, and what shifts those were. Paul had his fingers on the pulse of the time, and he wanted to be part of it. In 1968, at the age of 15, which is around this time, he went to see Jimi Hendrix play live at the Pacific Coliseum. And that's what did it. The final piece of the puzzle that set him in motion to be a musician and composer. Experiencing the uniqueness of Hendrix's music and style of playing not only cemented Paul's commitment to combining different genres in music, but also to the art of surrendering musically to the feelings and instincts that travel through you in the moment of playing. For him, that was an exquisite experience as a listener, and even better, shared as a creator. He and his friends formed a rock band. He played guitar, even while he was continuing his education in piano. I remember them playing at the house, but I cannot remember the band name. It was a long name. And we were just talking about it last year, and it has escaped my memory. It was The Seeds of, or The Revolutions of, or Interstellar something. If anyone knows, contact me somehow. I would like to be reminded. They say that Miles Davis was also influenced by Hendrix in the mid to late 60s. So perhaps not coincidentally, Paul's interest in Miles Davis also started around this time. Undoubtedly, Paul was making the rounds at the record stores to look and listen, to chat with other musicians and fans, and do research. I know Paul used to listen to his transistor radio late at night, too, and he was purchasing albums as soon as he could. Bitches Brew was released in 1970 and remained a favorite of Paul's forever. We spoke about that last year, too. Paul was 16, and he was listening to Miles from the 50s and Miles from the 60s and loving it, and then listening with awe as Miles transformed with the times through the early 70s, morphing and growing musically and taking chances musically in order to express himself and connect with people. Someone more qualified than myself may speak to this at some point today, but important to note that Paul loved the music, and he especially loved that Miles refused to be pigeonholed or in any way limited. Paul eventually saw him live, too, at the first On the Map Jazz Fest in 1986. In McGee High School, Paul got pretty good grades. Of course, he wasn't that interested in the curriculum, but he had some good friends there who also became musicians, which is kind of a beautiful thing. Paul played the piano for the high school production of The Music Man, and I remember he enjoyed that. But his mind was really focused rather on what his future could be like. After McGee, he went to the UBC and studied in the music program there under Kim Sung Lee. He also discovered James Joyce at UBC, which was another huge influence in his life, a way of connecting perhaps with his Irish roots, but also an epiphany for him regarding the world of breaking boundaries through words instead of music, as Joyce's way of storytelling during his time also merged the old with the new, also was multi-layered with references to literary history and form, colors, religions, relationships, the inner journey, and more. The release from traditional artistic form, while alluding to those references at the same time, was now a part of Paul's psyche, his spirit, and his purpose. So he didn't stay for the complete degree at UBC. He felt he didn't have to. He had a new idea and subsequently went on to study at the Center for Contemporary Arts at SFU. He became interested in musical forms of other cultures, primarily at that time, Javanese, Balinese, gamelan, and also Indian music. All of these cultures and others later influenced him tremendously in his music, in his choice of instruments, and in his spiritual life. Now, we have to go back to the pink shirt. That was supposed to come on now. No, the pink shirt, last one that you were. The previous one. There we go. He's around 18 here. My brothers were given the task of helping to clear some logs at our summer place in Haney. I'm pretty sure Paul wasn't as happy about it as he looks. But you know, he found fun in almost anything. Paul made his way through the world on his own terms, stumbling, succeeding, exploring and inventing, pondering, connecting with people and complex ideas, stretching his mind, which made him happy, and feeling the power and healing components of music through now his own visions and experiments. His trajectory was set in motion at a very young age, during a time when exploring beyond the traditional realms of societal norms was encouraged by his generation. This was the essence of being Paul. He was like this since he was very small, and his essence merely deepened at every stage of growth and development throughout his whole life. His curiosity was never sated, and his memory was exceptional. We enjoyed many conversations over the years, as I'm sure some of you did too, about everything, from throat singing to sound effects in film, philosophy, or when writing comedy together, discussing the meaning of, well, everything. He was a fantastic brother. He had my back, he shared with me, he inspired me and showed me that there was always another way. He taught me piano when I was 9. I think I was his first student. He opened up a world to me that has enriched my life in so many ways. He was the most expansive and at the same time inclusive person that I have ever known. And although he had his challenges like anyone, he was a very brave man. So that is a glimpse into his early years. As a side note, I want to add that by the time he was in his 30s, in terms of family life, he also really enjoyed being an uncle to Noriko, Julian, Emily, and Kyle. While they were growing up, he preferred to sit at the kids' table for many successive Thanksgivings and Christmases, never losing his ability to just be a kid, to live in the moment. And he loved being teased. Having fun was serious business for Uncle Paul. So from being a wonderful child and a questioning and determined teenager to a young adult already full of cultural knowledge and creativity and a career set in stone, he was also wonderful with children. You see, he believed in the future. We should remember that. For all of his criticisms of popular music, mainstream culture, and politics, he was essentially an optimist with a big heart. So thank you all again for being here and for sharing your stories here today too, in speeches and in the conversation area. I'd like to close with my genuine wish for you all. May you be deeply blessed with good health, true love, and abundant, long-lasting friendships. And may you have many transformative, joyful, and exuberant experiences. Paul would want that, and much more for everyone. Happy birthday, Paul. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. That was a wonderful talk. I am not as prepared as Denise. I have been installing this installation next door and taking care of all the things to put this event on. But first of all, I want to thank people, all these people. I won't name everybody, but the first people, Denise and her partner Abdul, were amazing when Paul needed help. When he started getting sick, they were there and they helped him all through that time. And St. John Hospice gave him excellent end-of-life care. Throughout the time Paul was ill, he made his own decisions about his care. There was nothing wrong with his mind. He just was, they ran so many tests on him. There was so many tests done on Paul, and he was 100% healthy, except he had lung cancer. So he was the one who was in charge, and he told us not to tell anyone that he was sick. He was going to tell everybody when he got better. He did get better before, as Denise mentioned, so it was not right outside that he could do it again. But as hope started to fade, he said, well, when he went into hospice, then we could tell people, and that's what we did. But we were just going along with Paul's wishes the whole time, and I have tried to make this event what Paul would really want. He curated that exhibit. This is just all the things that he saved through the years of his career, the things that were meaningful to him. And I have to admit, I didn't manage to get through all of them before this event. But thanks to Jared Burrows and the Capilano Library, there is now a Vancouver History Archive started. and Jared founded that. So as long as I can get permissions from the photographers and the creators of any of the articles don't mind, I'm going to be submitting all of this material to the archives. And then if you don't have time to look at everything today, and some of the stuff I haven't even got to yet, you will be able to see it in future in that archive, and it's publicly available to anyone. They do not accept yet video or audio, so I'm still seeking another place with which to house Paul's collections, which are vast, of recorded material and videos that he was part of. So I'd like to thank all these people, but that's okay. There's a sign at the front. If you want to go through it all, it's mainly the presenters who presented Paul, the musicians who worked with Paul, everyone who was such a great friend, fan, and supporter and came out to the concerts and clapped very loudly. This is always good. In so many jobs and gigs that I have done where the band outnumbers the audience, it's really super important for people to come out and support the music. So thank you to all the people who do that. Because without you, without the audience, there ain't no show. And I'm not the first person to say that. And then there's so many volunteers who helped. Paul's students stepped up to the plate. Arthur Garwood Delahook was one, and Aidan Farrell you'll hear of later. And there's many, many other people who came forward and helped. Daniel Tugas, he really helped me a lot with finding this stuff in the basement and organizing it in the first place. He's a wonderful young man. All of these people were Paul's students, and they've all followed some kind of musical career. So it's a great thing that Paul had so many students who are continuing to help him even now. And they will speak, one will speak to you about her training with Paul and her experiences. So everybody is important. Everyone was important to Paul. He was an amazing guy, and he made everybody feel like they were the only one in the world when he was talking to them. They were so important to him. And one of the things that just exemplifies that is if you look out at Paul's influences, you'll see a great big giant Jeff Beck poster. And you might think, gee, Paul must have really liked Jeff Beck a lot. Sure, Paul did like Jeff Beck. And when we were in Dublin, I saw that Jeff Beck was playing downtown. I got really excited. I said, Paul, we got to go see Jeff Beck. So he was excited too. We got tickets and we went down there. But Paul was so nice to the ticket taker, the person in the booth there. And he's like, oh, I'm Canadian. Oh, yeah, I'm Irish too. I've got my Irish passport. Oh, all this stuff. Where are your grandparents from? It's like, okay, you know. And so he said, well, you know, I think I might be able to get you a poster of this concert. And Paul went, oh, well, that's nice. And he didn't really think it was going to happen. But when we were coming out, all blissed out from seeing Jeff play Danny Boy, he did actually, this fellow was waiting to see Paul come through. And when he saw Paul, he waved him over, come on over, and he gave him a mailing tube with that poster in it. He wasn't the only one. Every time I went over to Paul's place, he would have something that someone gave him for free. A magazine, a loaf of bread, an extra muffin, a cappuccino. He would get something. People would just want to give something to Paul because he was so nice and he brought such good energy into their lives. And he brought great energy into my life. I'm a very shy person. I'm very introverted. I'm very much at home being the tech behind the stars and not having to stand up in the front. And it was always great for me to be around Paul because Paul would bounce into the room and everyone would say, hey, Paul, blah, blah, blah. And I could just stand over to the side. It's like, yeah, that's been my life. You know, it's like I could get away with that. No one say, like, well, you really said the wrong thing at that. No, I didn't actually, just, oh yeah. And everyone would talk to Paul, and I'd hear everything because I'd just be standing there. But now, of course, I don't have that luxury. And I also feel like half my brain is missing because I have number dyslexia. I am dyscalculia. So that means that you forget numbers instantly and you can't remember anything. And Paul always used to tease me, what's Beethoven's birthday? And I could never remember what Beethoven's birthday was, and he would just laugh. But the thing is like Paul remembered when Beethoven's birthday was, when Scriabin's birthday was, also when Haydn was different from Haydn. It's like, you know, okay, fine, Paul. But he knew so many things about music history. He was a real scholar, and he delved into things with all of his intensity. He said, I was born in the year of the snake. And I said, well, what does that mean? You know, I would think that snake is kind of negative. Do you speak with forked tongue or what? And he said, oh no, it means I swallow things whole like this. And he did. He swallowed everything whole. And he's got tons of books and research and all these things I have yet to go through and see. That was just the result of his exploring mind, constantly looking for new topics and new things to explore. He was an amazing person. And I think everyone would acknowledge a genius. He followed, just stuck to his guns and did exactly what he wanted in music and composition, despite other people saying, well, you know, like my mom always says to me, is like, well, if you applied yourself to business, you'd make millions. It's like, okay, that's not my direction, and it was not Paul's direction either. He was ready to just go for it, and he did. And when you look around that room next door, you'll see that he went to many, many countries. He went to Portugal, Spain, China. There's even a couple of posters from Sweden. There's some write-ups I did on his website. I've been designing his website for years. Like, I'm a tech, and my tech has been failing me today. I think Paul's having a little joke on me. I drove his car, and it's the estate wagon, so I drove it with all the posters and everything. I parked it across the way in the M Park. I paid for parking until midnight, and then I drove it over here to unload the car. It's still sitting there. It wouldn't start. There's absolutely nothing, just boom, nothing. It was fine. It was 100% great. Now, nothing. Paul wanted his car to be in the exhibit, that's all. Oh yes, he gets his way. He gets his way. And then, of course, he's having this little joke with me at the technology. I had tested that thing about 5 times with Denise. We went through it at the house. Bring it here, total fail. It's Paul's computer. That's he's in charge. Anyway, I won't take too much time because there's lots of people coming up, but I just wanted to share one thing here, is Paul was also into sports. I mean, you might not know it. This is when in 2015, I was in Vernon. I did an artist residency in Vernon, and Paul came with me, and I did some shots of the tennis, and he was showing me his prowess, and Paul also taught me ping pong, and he was a very, very good ping pong player. He played as a child with his brother, and he could spin and all this stuff, you know, but I was catching on. You know, I just wanted Paul to get some exercise and get out of the house, but he wanted to take up tennis, and you can see he immediately reverted back to his classic tennis stance there. So there he is, still clowning around. But, you know, Paul got so interested in sports, and he was in the Olympics. Not from tennis or ping pong, but he was actually, one more, an Olympic torchbearer. Yeah. And he didn't tell anybody about it. He modeled his outfit for me. When he got the outfit from the Olympic team, he put it on and he was showing me, oh yeah. And I'm like, oh, Paul, I should come and I'll stand in the side, I'll applaud, you know, when you go by and I'll cheer for you. And he goes, no, I'm not telling you where it is. I thought, come on, Paul, you know, it'll be fun. It's like, no, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do it. And so he did. He went out, and you can see he was very proud. And he told me that because it was the Olympics, he felt that he had to, you know, run the distance. So he was holding the torch high, Paul running down the course. Maybe that's why he didn't want me to get any pictures. But you can see he looked great. And that was Paul. He was doing so many different things. He never was trying to hog the limelight or like, look at me, I'm great. But it's just his positive energy and his beautiful outlook on life. We shared so many fun times together. And he just brought the party wherever he went. He was just great. And you'll get a chance to hear some of his music in the exhibit hall as well. And now we're going to play some music that Denise chose from Everything in Stages. And then Nou Dadoun is going to come out and interview some of the people who were important in the founding of the Nou Orchestra and in Paul's early career. And Paul was very loyal to the people that he played with. So many of the people that he started playing with way back in the day, he continued to play with right up until his last time of playing. So these people can really speak to Paul's career in a way that I cannot. I just got to know Paul later in life, but we really had a great time together. We bonded through food and all these different things that Denise was mentioning, his scholarship, the music that he loved, and Paul was the best music that I loved to hear. And so, of course, I fed him lots, you know, keep it going. And we did the house concert series. I'll talk about that at the end when I come back. So I'm just going to make this short. I'm going to come back at the end and do the final remarks, and I'm going to bring out Nou. But first, we're going to play this to give the people a little chance to prepare. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming. Read the thank yous at the front. And enjoy the exhibit.
Yeah, can I get Tron and Clyde and Gregg to come up, and we're just going to have a little bit of a round robin and talk and just have a discussion about Paul and his music. Hey, buddy.
I thought we were doing a more formal talk.
Formal. We're talking
Well,
about Paul.
I have prepared something.
Well, you'll get a chance.
I will.
Okay, good.
Come hell or high water. I'm a bird man, so.
Oh.
What's that up there? That's in the beginning.
Sure, why not? And everybody's got mics. There's a mic right behind you, right? It's a wireless one, so you can
Okay,
grab
good.
that. And there's supposed to be another wireless one.
Well, there's another one here.
Yeah, but it's wired.
we
Oh,
can-
well, we can do that.
That's fine.
There's like one of those talk backs in a meeting or something.
Okay, well, do you guys just want to pass that one back and forth? Okay, that would be good.
Or, yeah, whatever, yeah.
No, but it's
Well, just take it off and,
Oh, I would kill this then.
we're still working on setup. Sorry.
I would kill this one, I think. We'll just pass the wireless.
Yeah, okay.
there's supposed to be two of them.
Well, I don't know. Hang
Well,
on.
there's one there.
No, but I mean, there's supposed to be two wireless.
Okay, maybe we will use this.
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
just pass it back and forth.
That's good.
Okay.
You all set? Is that one going to work?
Talk about a polished presentation.
We're doing our best. This is great. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. I wanted to thank both Denise and Vicky for doing such great talks, and it really puts a lot of what I know about Paul and what I love about Paul into context. And Paul's here. Into context and explains a lot of stuff. My name's Nou Dadoun. If you've been to concerts in the Vancouver area in the last 40 years, you may have seen me around. I do the A-Trane radio program every Friday afternoon, and Paul has been a guest many times on the show, along with, I think, most of these people. What we're going to do is have a little bit of a talk show format, and I'm going to start off a little bit just talking about my relationship with Paul, and then maybe we'll go across and then have just a general discussion where people can come up with stories. Paul, to me, was one of those special musicians whose music it almost passed by the auditory senses. It just really reached in and touched my soul. And Paul's music was one of the few to do that for me. So Paul was definitely one of my favorite musicians in the world, and he was just such an expansive spirit. I actually knew Paul's music before I knew Paul. I moved to Vancouver in about 1980 and picked up an album called Up Till Now that I found in a record store, and was impressed enough by it that I started going to see some of these guys at the Western Front in the early 80s playing. And so the first time I actually met Paul as a friend was kind of interesting. At the very first jazz festival, I sort of dove in deep and organized the transportation. And at the end of the festival, we were going to have a bit of a post-mortem for the festival. And I was at Deborah Reutberg's house, Deborah Reutberg's old house on 12th, out near Dunbar. And she had gone out, and we were going to have a potluck dinner in the evening, and I was making Moroccan salads or something like that. And all of a sudden, I heard a piano, and I'm looking around like, where did that come from? And Paul had let himself in the front door and sat down at the piano and started playing. Apparently, Deborah took possession of Brian Nation's piano, when the Vancouver Jazz Society evaporated, and one of the standing deals was that Paul could drop by and play anytime, and he would just sort of show up. So for the rest of the afternoon, I was in heaven. I was serenaded by Paul while I'm cooking in the kitchen and doing all this other great stuff. But Paul would show up at the oddest times. When I was doing my thesis, I would often work late into the night and go by Benny's Bagels at 4 in the morning for a snack. And there's Paul, sort of sitting having a snack. And I also remember at the Glass Slipper, we'd be wrapping things up at 2 a.m. And Paul would show up ready to play, and he would stay there till dawn playing the piano. Later on, when I was running Black Swan Records on Broadway, Paul lived in the neighborhood, and so he would hang out at Black Swan all the time. And after closing time, I would often go back to his place, and we would have these great listening sessions in his man cave in the attic, listening to Frank Zappa and all the kinds of music that we both loved, and just talked about music for hours. We knew that we could always sell Paul any new Frank Zappa release. So we made sure to order everything as far as that went. After the store closed, I didn't see him quite as often, although later on he did give our kids lessons, Benjamin on guitar and Calder on piano, but that never really worked out, not because of Paul's fault, but because they weren't quite into it yet. But it was always great seeing Paul, and like Vicki said, when you were talking to Paul, you were the only one in the world. He had this sort of laser vision, and he would put on this sort of mock serious smile. Do you really think so? And he had this sort of personal connection with everybody, and that's really the way I remember Paul. Just such a wonderful guy. I'm going to hand things over to Ron Samworth to talk a little bit about your experience with Paul.
Mike here, thank you, Nou. Well, I wasn't prepared for this format. I had actually prepared a little presentation about Paul, but I guess we're improvising here. Go figure. Well, it's a real honor to be up here. There are people out here I see in the audience that likely were closer to Paul than I was. I've known Paul for almost 40 years now, since the early 80s, and I can't say enough about what an inspiration and joy he was to be around, both to play with and just to hang out with. Truly one of the funniest, most spontaneous conversationalists I ever met. He was just a riot. I mean, God, he made me laugh. So my presentation, I was going to sort of, in the spirit of Paul's elliptical manner of thinking, start from the end and end at the beginning of my relationship to Paul. So I'll start with the last time I encountered Paul, and then I'll finish up later because I've got a special little I won't say gimmick, a device I want to employ. Hopefully, Paul would certainly approve. The last time I spoke to Paul, and I think that's in part why I'm speaking here, is that we shared an uncommon bond, and sort of in the words of Groucho Marx, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me. And that club we shared was cancer. I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor at this point, as was Paul, of course, when we spoke. And Paul phoned me when he was ill, and he asked me if I had any advice, anything I could recommend in terms of treatment options, viable things that he might pursue. And I told him about, the drugs that had saved my life, and some of the people I had encountered and some of the doctors I'd worked with.
And he said, is there anything else? And I think I caught him off guard. He might have been expecting something like dietary or some such advice. But really all I had to say to him was, check, I've been reading stuff, some Zen readings and the Tibetan book on death and dying. And I said, why don't you get to know death? Prepare yourself, meditate on it, what it really means, and embody that. And because that's what I did when I was told I had 3 months to live 7.5 years ago. So, I guess, my advice to him was, walk with death, get to know death. And once you've done that, you're free. It's not one of these things that can inhibit you, that you can be afraid of. We all have our trepidation, but just, making yourself familiar with the idea and the concept of not being here in your corporeal form is actually a real comfort. And given all the gray heads out there, I would say, it's something we could all heed. And that knowledge just, it makes you free. And that's what improvising is all about, is being free from fear and inhibition and all those things that can hang you up. So that was the last time I spoke to Paul, and I'm going to put it on to Clyde.
I moved to Vancouver in 1972, and Ken Pickering introduced me to Gregg Simpson, and we played music, and it's through Gregg that I met Paul. I think I started playing music with Paul around 1975. And it's been one of the great musical things in my life, is playing with Paul. And it's been pretty constant over many, many years. The last gig I think Paul had was in the Jazz Festival, and Kenton and I played with him in trio in the Jazz Festival. Just a couple of things that people have said I just want to follow up on. One is I visited Paul twice when he was in the hospice. And kind of the way Ron said, there was no fear, there was no anger, there was, why is this happening to me? It was just normal Paul. And I was pretty impressed. But people talk about, when you talk to Paul, you're the only thing, and he's so great with Vancouver, we're easy. Okay, of course we can be captivated by Paul. But there's more challenges in the world than laid back Vancouver. So there's 2 New York stories about Paul that he told me these stories. Well, one I was kind of involved with. We were in New York. It might have been the time that Now played the Knitting Factory. And so after we got to New York, hanging out with Paul that evening, and just curious, I said, Paul, we took different flights, but I was kind of suspicious of my taxi driver. What did you pay to go from the airport down to where we are now? And he said he came up with about $20 less than what I paid. And I said, what happened? He said, I don't know, I was just being my normal self, talking to the taxi driver and so on. He gets to drop me off and drops $20 off the bill and says, and please don't give me a tip. Okay, New York taxi drivers, that's a tough audience. And Paul was no manipulation, he was just being Paul. And he touched this guy. It was amazing, okay? And then he had another New York story of, he was visiting, I think a different time, he was visiting New York, and he was staying with some friends, and they said, Paul, we've got to take you to this great restaurant. It's fantastic. The food, you can't believe how great it is. But I have to warn you in advance, the waiters are assholes. They humiliate you, they diminish you. So if you can just rise above that and savor the experience of eating at this great place. So they go to the restaurant, And the waiters are falling all over Paul, can't do enough for him. Over and over. Want some extra anything? What can we do for you? The people that he was with said they'd never witnessed anything like that. And again, it was just Paul being Paul. And again, tough New York waiters. That's a tough audience as well.
Gregg got a plate of spaghetti in his lap.
Yeah. Well, but Paul had a gift, and that gift he brought to music. And so I was thinking about Wayne Shorter has this thing that he said, and that is that he didn't consider himself a musician. He considered himself a human being that happened to play music. And I think of the human being that was Paul, and no wonder his music was great. No wonder his relationships were great. It was what he was, who he was, and we were lucky that he also gave us the music. But if it hadn't been for music, it still would have been Paul, still would have been great.
Hi, folks. Yes, well, I met Paul, and he wouldn't even remember because my dad was good friends with Basil Plimley. I think bought his cars from Plimley's Motors because we had a new Buick every year for the short time that my dad stayed around, at least. Anyway, but I remember going over to the Plimley house, and we went by the big signs on the Plimley Motors and went to the house. And we were eating, and there was two little blonde kids running around in the backyard, and that was Paul and Mark, I imagine. So that was my first taste of that. So our family stayed friends for quite a while, and they golfed together, my dad and Basil. Yeah. So there was a family connection there, but I didn't really meet Paul in person until about 1975, just around the time I started playing with Clyde. Paul had been to our band Sunship at the Commodore opening for Keith Jarrett, which was quite a night. Keith didn't want us there at all. But
Especially after he heard us.
especially after he heard us and heard Ross Barrett doing his introductions.
Ross is here.
Is he?
Ross is here.
Good, well, you remember them. Yeah, Ross. Anyway, but playing with Paul started in little sessions and things, and then we did some commercial work together. We played with a fellow named Rock and Rolly. Yeah, you remember him? He would take his sax apart as he played. Dismantled the sax as he played. It was kind of surreal. Kind of Roland Kirk, yeah, the black guy, yeah. He was far out playing rock and roll. So we did some funny gigs together with Paul too, with Art Knapp's Plantland in Surrey, in the parking lot, with the electric piano. Oh yeah, and then the champion gig for, this is straight ahead music, but we played for Dining and Dancing at the Mandarin Hotel. The trio, the picture is the audition picture is out in the hall there with suits on. So we, my mom and Frank, her husband, came, and all, people did come, and they dined and danced, and we played standards, and
We were a hit at the Mandarin.
it was a big hit. They liked us.
Undertakers, that
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, that's it. Yes.
Swinging planets.
So, but the first real, super band that I did with Paul was called the Vancouver Sound Ensemble, and that was with Bruce Friedman on tenor, and John Giordano was the bass player, Los Angeles bass player, who's dead now, but we had this gig at Oil Can Harry's in the jazz room upstairs, and we got to play on the same bandstand with the same piano, same sound system, in between Mingus, McCoy Tyner, Sonny Rollins, Bobby Hutcherson, and we'd be the fill-in house band. I mean, it was amazing, truly was, and Paul's played.
The intermission band.
Not opening for them. No, we were the act, and yeah, we got a lot of good press. Paul's very much influenced by Cecil Taylor, especially at that time, and then later studied with Cecil and hung out with them and went and heard Horace Silver concerts with him.
So I know your relationship with Al Neal. What's the relationship between Al Neal and Paul? Because I always thought of Paul as sort of the next generation.
Sure. Well, this is the amazing thing is that I got to play with Al Neal when I was 18, still living at home, just finished high school, and that group carried on and sort of started the whole 60s. What can I say? We opened at the Trips Festival for the Grateful Dead and Janis Joplin. Yeah, with a free jazz trio. So that was the first free jazz piano group in Vancouver, or in Canada probably. There was a few things back east, but
The Royal Canadians?
yeah, with Al Neal and the Royal Canadians, I called it at one point. We had all kinds of funny. I mean, it was really a wacky time, and that carried on. I mean, that spirit of multimedia also carried on from the cellar to the New Orchestra Workshop, which we then formed after the Sound Ensemble, with the famous New Orchestra Quintet that did the Up Till Now record, and the three of us are still here. But anyway, and then after that really was the various combinations, mainly a quartet called Motion for a while. Paul played a lot of vibraphone in that, which most people haven't heard enough of his vibraphone playing, was fantastic. Yeah, probably, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so he was great at that. And then we had the trio with Clyde and I, and that did gigs all through the next 20 years and did some amazing concerts. So all the playing with Paul, when you played, the music of the spheres, you were sort of creating the universe every time you sat down to play with them. So it was, you could do tunes, or you could do, improvs or originals. We played a lot of our own original compositions. And the one that I composed first was called Public Nuance, and Paul really brought that alive. I mean, I didn't know anything about harmonies or anything, and they kind of put that together. So Paul would work on your music with you, If we could play that, that would be nice, because it's such a great piano solo on that piece. Is there a chance we can do that?
Okay,
Or is it glued up?
maybe when we're done.
Yeah, that would
Okay.
be better, yeah.
Tron, did you have something to say?
Oh, no, I was just grabbing this to make stupid interjections that people could hear instead of these comments under my breath.
What else can I say? But yeah, playing with Paul was very special, of course, because we had this humor element to everything, and we'd have these long phone calls, and just the puns and the wordplay would go on for half an hour. We'd just be in stitches, or we'd try and blow each other's minds about the like famous people we'd
The
seen.
puns got a little old, actually, but they never slowed down. They
No,
never
we didn't.
stopped.
That didn't stop us.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Paul, he would work that humor into the music sometimes. We had this group, Sessione Milano, which had all this whole sort of theater thing in it. And he was just right there with that immediately.
I think anybody who's heard Paul, or obviously everyone's heard Paul, and or played with him, realizes that Paul was pretty inseparable from his music. His quick reflex, his sense of humor, his reaction time was phenomenal. I mean, he could change directions on a dime, and it was really exhilarating to play with him, and so much fun. Just an absolute riot.
Always, yeah.
Always uplifting.
But, we talk about classical or 20th century composers as much as, or more than we talk about jazz, actually. And I used to like to tell him that I'd seen Stravinsky conduct The Rite of Spring in Vancouver in 1964, and he just went, what? And then he told me that he'd seen the famous Berlin Philharmonic von Karajan conducting Beethoven in Berlin. So we'd, riff like that all the time. We'd exchange stories. He'd spent time with Sun Ra, a special session with Sun Ra, talking like a meet and greet.
Would have been interesting if Paul had spoken with Glenn Gould, I think would have been some kind of a conversation.
Yeah, very much.
Or Marshall McLuhan or something like that.
Very intellectual, but yeah, kind of a mercurial spirit.
But he also loved stuff like Ali Akbar Khan and Nikhil Banerjee and all the Indian guys and
he worked with
Korean
Shank.
court music and you name it.
Well, he did the recording with Trishi Shankran.
Richie Shankaran.
That's right, yeah.
And it's not a Paul story, but it's related to a Paul story. So he did this recording with Trishi. Our friend Vinny Golia teaches at Cal Arts, a great world music thing. Trishi comes, the place worships him like he's from somewhere else. And Vinny walks in the room, and Trishi says, Vinny, and he runs over and hugs him. And the people at Cal Arts were well, that made Vinny's career at Cal Arts. Yeah.
Well, there's no kind of music that he wasn't interested in, even pop. I mean, he liked Sugar Sugar by the Archies. Yeah, he told me he liked that song. It's a very
Well,
good pop song.
I'm wearing this in honor of Paul. If you can see this, that's one of John Lennon's doodles, him and Yoko. So
Yeah, he did love the Beatles. Yeah.
we shared a lot of interest in pop culture trivia, and that was one of our great touchstones when we would speak. We'd go on at length, or Paul would go on at length about Mike McCartney's music career and his oeuvre, Paul McCartney's brother. This is the kind of arcana that Paul was into.
But he would switch from genre to genre and have the same attitude to each of them. He wasn't condescending to one or the other, or pulling punches either. I mean, he was just great with
Just
all
open.
forms of music.
Yeah, he saw the value in all forms,
And his hero was Duke Ellington, who said there's only two types of music: good music and bad music. So.
Well, I remember seeing Paul do a film accompaniment to a silent movie at the Ridge, and he pulled out all this stride stuff that I'd never heard him play before.
Doesn't surprise me.
Just crazy stuff.
Paul had these amazing musical gifts. And partly, Denise mentioned it, he had this phenomenal memory. So, and if you're hanging out and he thinks of a cartoon that he heard 30 years ago, and he sits down and plays the music. That wasn't the artistic high point, but it's just part of his gifts. Reharmony is when you take a melody from a popular song and change the chord, reharmonize the chord changes under it. Genius at that. Yeah. He didn't have perfect pitch, but he had amazing relative pitch. So he didn't take very much for Paul to know where you were and where it was going.
Yeah, caught on fast.
But again,
He's a great mimic, too.
yeah. But what we are missing, and I feel this is a big loss, Dylan Vanderscape does an incredible impersonation of Paul. Can you do it?
No. It would be something along the lines of, Clyde. Clyde, I just wanted to say to you, Clyde, I've been thinking a lot about the...
Do you really think so?
Got a second career coming.
Well, maybe I should do what I was going to do. It doesn't have to be a closer or anything, but it was sort of pursuant to this idea of just what a funny guy Paul was, and so engaging. The first time I met him, like I said, I don't know if I was off mic or, when I was saying it, I first heard Paul playing vibes on a Joint is Jumping broadcast, so I was familiar with his music. And I could hear, I just remember lying in my room. I would have been, probably 16 years old, listening to the radio on a Sunday night. And I just imagined this guy. It wasn't far off, actually. You could hear it in the music, the playfulness. I could just, the music, he embodied the music. So I imagined this lunatic kind of bouncing around on the vibes there, and sure enough, as I came to know him, that pretty much was it. First time I met him would have been in some social situation. Now I can't really remember. It would have been probably in about 1984, either around Clyde's coffee table on Union Street, because Paul lived across the street. Graham Ward was around the corner. Tamba. Oh, he was in Clyde's basement for a time. That's right.
A great house guest.
Great house.
Well, nothing to say about it other than he lived in my basement for a year or more, and it was great. You want a little entertainment? Hey, Paul, what are you doing? Yeah.
So lots of playing music?
Huh?
Lots of playing music?
Lots of music.
Yeah.
Lots of music. Yeah. It was he was great to be around.
So I want to do this shtick and get out of the way because I've been nervous about it. The first time I met Paul, it was in this social situation. It also might have been a house party because I remember we went on for quite some time. But he just made me laugh with his imitations. Duke Ellington, he did a deadly Duke Ellington. He liked my Miles imitation. He'd be like, "Hey, Paul, well, I just want to say, I think about Tony Williams, you know. He doesn't play the ride like nobody else. You know, he might fall, and he played that too. You know, so he dug some of my shtick. But one thing he did that just had me on the floor was he recited from memory "The Dust Blows Forward and the Dust Blows Back" by Captain Beefheart, and knocked me right out. And as a tribute to Paul, I think we got to have a liturgical moment here. So, fuck it, I thought I would indulge myself. There it is. The incredible trout mask replica. We used to joke about, well, we didn't used to joke. I mentioned to him that I wanted to do a production of trout, you know, a cover performance of trout mask replica in its entirety at Trout Lake and call it Trout Lake Replica. He loved that idea. He was all over it. So let me just prepare myself here. You guys know this. You got to join in, okay? It's a tongue twister, but I just want to do this. Give me the mic. I just want to do this as a tribute to dear Paul, because I know he'd appreciate this. And I think every memorial needs to have a liturgical moment. I got some tape here. Yeah, sorry, I'm hogging the mic here. This is to do my Don Van Vliet soul patch. I just thought I should get into the spirit of it. And I brought this thing for the requisite lo-fi quality. You could hold the mic for me, you know? Just make sure it doesn't feed back. Okay. Are we ready? Sing along with me. Number 251 in your hymn book. There's an old gray with her dove-winged hat. You want to bring the mic up here so we can get it to the people in? There's old Green with her sewing machine. Where's the bobbin hat? Toting old grain in a printed sack. The dust blows forward and the dust blows back. And the wind blows black through the sky. And the smokestack blows up in sun's eye. When am I gonna die? A white flake riverboat just flew by. Bubbles hot big. And a lipstick Kleenex hung on a pointed forked twig. Reminds me of the Bobby girls. Never was my hobby, girls. Handful of worms and a pole fishing. Cork bobbing like a hot red bulb. And a blue jay squeaks, his beak open an inch above a creek. Gone fishing for a week. Well, I put down my bush and I took off my pants and fell free. The breeze blowing up me and up the canyon far as I could see. It's night now and the moon looks like a dandelion. It's black now and the blackbird's feeding on rice. And his red wings look like diamonds and lace. I can hear the maisto scampering, gophers rumbling in Pile Crater rock hole. One red bean stuck in the bottom of a tin bowl. Hot coffee from a crimped up can. Me and my girl named Bimbo, Limbo, Spam.
Yeah. Oh, Paul would have loved it.
I love you, Paul.
How do we follow that? God.
Reminds me of some of Paul's writing, actually, because Paul did a lot of writing, especially
Yeah.
towards the end, I think, and there's a carryover, I think, in that imagery.
Well,
There's something in his,
I mean,
yeah, but there's something in Paul's writing which is quite brilliant, actually. I haven't read that much of it, but kind of reminds me of Captain Beefheart, or maybe Cecil Taylor's writing as well.
yeah. In conversation, Paul could evoke that kind of imagery. It just was very,
Make it
very,
up, yeah.
it was very spontaneous
Yes,
and rich and
Well,
imagistic.
I remember talking with him about Finnegan's Wake, and I saying, like, yeah, I just couldn't get into it. And he said, it's like free jazz, just dive in anywhere.
Did you ever
There's no
hear
tune.
Paul speak in French? Same thing. So he didn't know much French, but then he's in a situation where there's French people, and he just dives in that too, fearless. And it works. And there was a conversation. And Paul didn't know how to speak French. There was a conversation.
Details.
It's amazing.
I remember that you mentioned that trip to New York with the 1990 knitting factory set with, all our groups came down there. When Paul and I checked into the, what was it, the
Seafarers Inn.
Seafarers Union place, and there was a guy at the desk, of course, and he burst into a musical song or an operetta or something. He just started singing, and I think Paul probably joined in with him. I mean, it was talk about a New York moment. The guy was just, yeah.
It was an actual hotel for seafarers,
Yes. And jazz musicians.
or the Seaman Hotel, even seedier.
Even better.
No pun intended. Eh?
Well, Greg, do you want to talk a little bit about the early days of the Now Society? I mean, how did all that come
well,
together?
the Now
And
Society-
I mean, I'm also curious about like Woodstock and Carl Berger and
Sure. Well, I'm not as much of an expert on that. I know they went there, though. Lisle and Paul
Yeah.
spent a lot of time with Cecil there, and Carl Berger came out to us in Vancouver and did workshops. But the original idea of the New Orchestra Workshop, the quintet itself, was called New Orchestra Workshop. We never really performed, I don't think, under that name. Maybe at UBC in our first concert, though.
okay.
So I came up with the workshop part of it. I think we all jostled the names around, and it was supposed to be like the Mingus workshop. In other words, it was really about composing, and it wasn't about giving workshops or taking them either, for that matter. Mm-hmm. So somehow we formed a society, though, because we got a grant, of course, in Canada. And Canada Council came to our aid, and we started a community orchestra called CORD, Community Orchestra Research and Development, with Don Druick helping us to get the grant. That's what did it. Paul Cram and Don Druick and I took a walk in the Capilano River Canyon for some reason, and that's where we came up with the idea of how we'd apply for a grant to start the Now Society. It became a legal society, and we didn't raise that much money off it, but we did a lot of things under the Now banner, and they still are being done by at least other people. So,
And it's still continuing onward, yeah.
well, it's been reinvented at least
Yeah.
3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
But the New Orchestra Quintet had to be called that rather than New Orchestra Workshop, because there was a New Orchestra Workshop now, which was a society which was doing all these things and promoting concerts as well. We put on Mal Waldron's solo concert. And all of this music, I should mention now, it's not a plug, but it's where you can hear Paul's earlier music especially, is on Condition West Recordings. It's a Bandcamp is the name of the website, bandcamp.com. Bandcamp, and / or whatever, Condition West Recordings, and there's a ton of archival recordings there. And you can listen for free to them, or download them for a penny. So there's a lot of Paul on that, for sure.
Yeah, Tron,
One of the first live concerts of improvised music I heard, and I'd been listening quite avidly in high school, combination of rock and whatnot, progressive rock and 60s stuff. And somehow we got into improvised music, some of the most challenging stuff there was. My friends and I think we were probably chemically induced listeners. And it just made sense, with the energy of some of the rock music, the improvisational rock that we were playing in the later 70s, and the improvised music. So one of the first live concerts I saw was the Art Ensemble of Chicago, which I believe was a Now presentation at the Queen Elizabeth Theater. Was it not?
Brian Nation, perhaps?
Oh, was that Brian that did
Yeah,
that?
it
I
was
was
back
pretty,
and
I
forth.
thought it was a Now production. I remember Paul Cram.
Yeah, that was a bit beyond, that was the Queenie.
Oh, okay. I'm
But,
mistaken then.
Anyway, the Now Society did feature creative music festivals every year, which Paul would have been in, of course, with various people, and produced various small ensembles, some of which are on that Blue Tails in Time Paul Cram album, which had Trio Non Troppo was part of that. So there was all these different satellite operations. And eventually we sort of outgrew that stage and went on to do things, and then came back in the 80s and reformed Now with different groups. And so it's been a long history, and Paul was there for all of it.
I just want to say about now, for me it was, I got to know these guys in the, like I said, in the early mid-'80s. And one thing that, being a guy from Richmond who was into improvised music, to be embraced by these master musicians, these guys who are a little bit older than me, who are really doing it and playing this music, was an incredible gift. And I can't thank you guys, and Paul was a part of that family that invited me in so readily. At the time I was about 23 years old, and probably much like you and Al Neil playing, it's just, it's pivotal, right? It just
Welcome to the family.
yeah, it brings you in, and it makes you realize that there are other ways to make your way in the music world and to embody creativity and spirit, you know. And that's now, and the work continues today with Lisa Miller and her endeavors at 8 East, building a community.
Continue and bringing great players in to Vancouver. That's still all going. Check out 8 East on Saturday. There will be music in a tribute to Paul Plimley, 8 East, at 8 East Pender.
That's going to be going
Yes.
through the afternoon into the evening, celebrating Paul's music. I just wanted to read a little quote, Tron's comment. This is from Bill Shoemaker, who is a well-known jazz researcher and journalist. 25 years ago or so, Dave Rubian and I pronounced Plimley to be an adjective, connotating quirkiness, whimsy, and bonhomie. No one before or since surpasses Paul in representing Vancouver in the international field of creative music. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, he's big time.
And I think we can wrap things up. Greg, did you have something that you wanted to play?
I had something queued up.
Okay, all right.
Public Nuance piece, which has a great solo. It's just the piano solo.
Okay.
I fade it before Ralph comes in with the funk feel. I don't know.
I think
haven't
Ralph
seen
is
him.
here, yeah.
Ralph Epple, are you here?
Ralph? No.
Lyle's here.
Lyle's here. Yeah. Anyway, cue that one up if you like.
And maybe I'll just take this opportunity to say thank you to Gregg, Clyde,
you,
and
Nate.
Tron for their remembrances. And we'll be moving on after the music finishes. Thanks. Thank you again to Gregg, Tron, and Clyde. I just wanted to mention that the A-Trane tomorrow is going to feature 3 unreleased concerts of Paul's. So it's going to be all Paul all the time tomorrow afternoon if you want to check it out. Thanks very much. And I think Wayne Stewart is up next.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's 58. These are great. They double. You want to build the stage.
Hey, everybody. I thought you were a little more awake than that. Hello, everybody. Much better. My name is Wayne Stewart. For those of you who don't know me, for those of you who do know me, keep quiet. I am a musician. I also act. I've done stage teching in this town since 19. And I was a friend of Paul Plimley's. Which is hardly an exclusive group. You know, he could make friends anywhere he went. He was one of those social magnets who walked into a room and all of a sudden there was a party going on. I was lucky enough to first meet him at a piano. Actually, there used to be a place on Commercial Drive called Santos Tapas. And Santos is where you went to drink on Commercial Drive, where various people went to do cocaine. There was a place where they hired musicians, and I was in there one night playing a gig. They had a piano, and this man sidled up to the piano and started saying, "Hi, I like you're playing, so on, so on, so on." And within like about 5 or 10 minutes, we were playing 4-hand piano at the place. And of course, I was in shock because, you know, when Paul Plimley comes and sits down next to you at the piano, nothing can prepare you for what was going on. But thankfully, we became fast friends. And one of the other things I do is I host events. Some of you might have seen me host a few events around here over the years. And Victoria asked me to do this, and of course I could not turn down anything to do with Paul Plimley. That's about as much about me as you're going to hear, unless you have any questions or I owe any of you money or... we're going to turn the attention now to this section is supposed to be about Paul's music and career. You have already heard some of the music. You've already heard some of the reminiscences. My only contribution to a lot of that is going to be that he was one of the most amazing, dynamic, and engaging pianists that has ever drawn breath. And he does not get the due that he is so richly deserves. But we're going to give it to him in this room, aren't we? Excellent. So I have the pleasure of introducing to you probably Paul's longest term collaborator. Would that be accurate? I was about to say, you know, I was thinking, well, Gregg's here, Clyde's here.
Paul a little longer.
Yeah, okay.
I met Paul on a gig that he came to audition for in I was telling somebody this just earlier. It might be 50 years to the day, because it was late winter of 1973 or early spring. So yeah, right around this time, I was working at the Grouse Nest. I don't know does that still exist? It was like the best gig in town. Next to the Bayshore Inn was another good gig. But I'd been studying piano and arranging with a pianist named Gerald Inman. And Gerald was the pianist. There was a drummer named Steve Bryce, and it was Steve's gig. He was a terrible drummer, but he had the gig for somehow, politics probably. And we would take the gondola up every night to the top of the Nest, and the maitre d' would make us hold out our arms and make sure, because it was tuxedos. I had a second-hand, cheap tuxedo, but the shirts had to be crisp, no stains on the cuffs or on the collar. You get docked $5. So, and Jerry had enough of us and said, I can't play with you guys anymore, you suck. And we did, but no fault of his. He was a great pianist. Is he still around? Does anyone? Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. No, truly. Yeah, it sounds funny, but no, I get that. Because he played a lot with Pat Coleman, who was also, I think, came out of the Edmonton scene, which was extraordinary musicians up there. Anyway, so 73, we did the gig at the Grouse Nest. Paul came to audition to replace Jerry. He did not get the gig, but I could tell, wow, this guy could play the piano. But he was inexperienced, you know. You need to know all those tunes, you know, and just off the cuff, and he didn't. But yeah, that's 73.
So just so that we're all clear here, everybody, this is Lisle Ellis.
It's great to see you all. Well, most of you. Let's be honest, some of you. Now that we got that out of the way, yeah, what to say about Paul that you already don't know or feel in your hearts, and what, it's just the two of us here, huh? Cool.
Yeah,
go.
it looks like it.
Okay, good.
We can pretend to have a conversation.
Yeah, this is relaxing. Okay. I lost my train of thought. Just
Okay.
kidding. I'm kidding, but get ready for it because it will happen, and when it happens, you can start laughing. And you know, that was, I think you'll all agree, that was the bottom line with Paul. He did not care if you were laughing at him or with him, as long as we were laughing, and that is the essence of everything with Paul. His music, his demeanor, his temperament, his character. And, you know, we vied for the same women several times. And one woman in particular called me Dark Lisle. And he was Light Paul. And you know who won, right? It wasn't me. Yeah, I could tell you stories.
Well, why don't you tell us about... So I'm guessing that you guys go back to that gig at the Nest. When did you really start getting together and grooving and touring?
Well, shortly after that, I went to New York to study, and so it would have been late in '75 that we Paul and Buff Allen and I had a trio. Paul was on. What's that number, that street? 49th. Does that make sense? 49th Street. He had the house. Oh, yeah, and his neighbor was the guy that grew poppies in the backyard and used to make the poppy tea.
Welcome to Vancouver.
Yeah, I can tell you some. You know, Paul never was interested in any of that. He was such a pure spirit. Myself, you know, other things happened. That house on 49th was, we had the trio with Buff originally, and then some other people. Gregg, I think, was the next guy to show up, maybe Paul Cram, and we were getting very interested in, for me, it was this band called Circle, if any of you remember that, was the extraordinary group with Dave Holland and Chick Corea, Barry Allstall, Anthony Braxton, and you know, those four remarkable, extraordinary musicians together was such a huge influence on me and Paul too. He loved Chick's playing, and so we were investigating that approach to playing standards, because standards was pretty well what we knew, you know, like Cecil. You know, Cecil Taylor, who was a huge influence, as you know, his first records were playing standards, the classics. And that's what we wanted to do, but we wanted to try to find some other way to do them that wasn't just, because we could never reproduce what, Ray Brown, I could never reproduce Ray Brown as hard as I tried, but our Oscar Peterson, pianists like that. So we started experimenting with playing standards in different ways, and of course, interjecting some of our own compositions. And once we got Ralph Eppel together and Paul Cram and Gregg, and we said, wow, this is so much fun. Wouldn't it be great to have like 20 people playing this? And we eventually got that, and that was the beginning of the New Orchestra Workshop. And the rest is misery. History.
When did it start to take off for you guys? Like, you're talking about being huddled in a house in 49th trying to work out how this is going to work.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You all went on to tour the world. When did it become obvious to you? Or no, maybe it didn't become obvious. Like, when did that start happening?
Well, let's address specifically Paul and I's meteoric stellar
rise to the bottom.
Interstellar stardom in the world of free jazz, which, we never liked that word, that phrase, free jazz. We called it cheap jazz. And we thought that, it was never free. We always wanted money. But we would play for very little. That would be the Victoriaville Festival. Because Paul and I had, not separated ourselves from the quintet, but we had this duo thing. We practiced together. We practiced incessantly, just the two of us, for hours, days, it would seem. Sometimes when Paul had his first bout with cancer, he came and lived with my then wife at the time, and we nursed him back to health. And I had an upright piano, pretty good one, in the house, and so we would just, he would sleep on the floor at the foot of the piano, and we'd get up and we'd keep at it. So we were working on the duo, and we were sending out tapes, recordings to different record companies. We found out years later all those tapes, press kits, whatever we had, all went right in the circular file. Nobody ever listened to them because they had people called A&R people that, took care of the artists. And so we were at Victo in 85, 86. Not sure about the dates. Paul had the steel trap memory. I'm sure some of you know. He would do things that, hey, Lisle, remember when we were playing in Louisville, that festival, man? And like that bass solo in the third piece, and it started out, and I'd go, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? It was inhuman, it's superhuman, this Total Recall. So cut me off because I'll just yak, I have so much to say about this guy and stories to tell, and some of them may not be fit for...
Okay, I'll put you back on track. I'll put you back on track. You were saying that Victoriaville. What happened at Victoriaville that changed your...
That changed our lives, yeah. Sort of, kind of, not really. We had a big gig. It wasn't the main stage. That was reserved for Cecil Taylor and the superstars, who we were emulating, of course. But it was a really big gig for the two of us, and we would get pretty nervous before these gigs. I remember the Knitting Factory gig in New York when I came off the stage. I think I was ankle deep in water because we just sweat. I just would lose 10 pounds in a set, and. But we were as nervous And so we were pacing back and forth, and Michelle Lasser, the director, was saying, okay, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. And then Paul said, okay, I'm going to put my contact lenses in. I said, okay, good idea. Because, he needed glasses, but the way Paul moved, like a dancer, a very round dancer, but a dancer, and the way he moved, the glasses would not work, because they would go flying off, maybe hurt somebody in the audience, or... So he said, I'm going to put my contacts in. And I think back then you had two solutions, the one that you stored them in, or the one you cleaned them in, the one he mixed the solutions up. So, and it was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. He got this bad solution in his eyes, and he was blinded. So Michelle was knocking on the door. Okay, you're on. And I said, well, no, he's injured. He can't, we have to wait. He's got to get this. And so he tried for about 10 minutes. Now we're 10 minutes late for the gig. Then 15 minutes, Paul's in there trying to get the contact lenses out. It's not working. I get a candle because, when you have that situation, you can't see light. Your eyes will automatically close. So I had to get a candlelight, got in there, got him in a headlock, and was, trying to pry the contact lenses out of his eyeballs. And that didn't work. And he got really...
Really?
Really, yeah, no, this is honest. No sense to lie here, I tell you. I've lied a lot, but not today. He was really pissed at me. It was the only time I thought he actually might hurt me. We started fighting in the dressing room, and because I really had him in a headlock. Because I knew this gig. There was people like Art Lang and all the top critics from all over the world were in the fucking audience. This was our chance for superstardom and, untold riches and fame, I was not letting him, derail this. So I got him in the headlock. He fought me off. And Michelle was at the door, okay, 20 minutes late, Ellis, Plimley, get the hell, he was, and that wasn't going to help. I knew that. So I went out and I said, look, this is what's happened. And Michelle was aghast and said, okay, we're calling the ambulance. We're canceling the gig. This is it. I'm going to make an announcement. There's been a medical emergency and that you guys cannot play. And I said, okay, I'll tell Paul that. And I told Paul that, and Paul said, he kicked me out of the room, slammed the door, was in the room for another maybe 3-4 minutes, and he came out, and he had got the contacts out. And we went right to the stage. So we had no time to think about how important the gig was. That was all out, that was done with. So we just went out and we played the music, because with this music, you have to understand, the best music never happens in front of you. It never happens there. Never. It's never happened for me there. It's always in private, because you make the music with us. You make the music. You influence us. Maybe it's true. It really is. After 70 years of doing this, that's been my experience, and I think you would agree.
Yeah.
It's always
Absolutely.
We went out and we played. Well, you can see the posters are on the wall, and there's books, there's reviews. The hit of the festival, unbelievable. Blah 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 blah. The record company that we'd sent numerous tapes to, they were on the phone, because their A&R guy was in the audience. They were on the phone, I think, within 72 hours saying, okay, you are coming to Switzerland. We're going to make this record. They wanted to dictate what we were going to play, of course, as they always do. You're going to do the music of anybody you want. It can be Albert Ayler, A-Trane, it can be Monk, whatever you want. You decide, but we don't want your own music. We want you to do an interpretation of it. And so we picked Ornette because that was there was no piano in Ornette's music particularly involved. So that freed Paul up, and yeah, that was it.
There you go. We love you. We want what you do, as long as you don't do what you do. That we can't stomach.
Well, they didn't understand what we were doing because we were like a prismatic lens of all this music that had come through us that we loved so deeply but we didn't grow up in New York. I mean, I'm from Campbell River, you know. I'm one of 12 kids, you know. My uncle was a country and western singer. You know, my parents were right off the boat from Glasgow. We didn't know anything, but there was something in black music that touched us and that we loved so deeply that it transformed. It was transforming. It changed us, who we were, and yeah.
There you go. So, what was the last time you collaborated with Paul?
Probably over one of our. We would. This was pre. What do they call it on the over?
Apocalypse?
No, yeah, it felt apocalyptic, but it was. You know how you can play on the internet over the internet now, but you need a certain
live stream.
Live stream. That's the term. But you need some broadband. They have some devices out there. But we would play over the telephone. Paul and I, the longest telephone conversation we had was 6 hours. And we would play, for a couple hours of that would be playing. And we did that regularly. I hadn't spoken with Paul for about 6 months, but that was not unusual. We would go, and then just like he was with you, right? It was like no time had passed with Paul. He lived outside of that. So you would see him, and it was like you just pick it up where you left off, and that's the way. Paul was my pal, you know.
Wow. Go ahead, say it.
And
share your among
like
friends.
A lightweight word, pal. But hey, it's almost Paul. P-A-U. P-A, right? And the only letters that's different is you. And it's about you and me, Paul was the greatest pal. And I had to look that word up because I was thinking, wow, what can I call Paul? Like, he's my pal. He was my pal. Like no other. And that word is like an ancient word. It actually comes from Sanskrit, Broctor, that the gypsies picked up and changed to pal, Paul. He was my brother. And I had 6 brothers, and Paul was the best brother that I ever had.
Thank you. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. You're right. I mean, I remember the thing about Paul is that he seemed to have a million friends. Any room, like I said, any room he walked into, in about 3 minutes, there'd be laughter and jollity making and what have you, and he'd be at the center of it. And he was my pal. We palled around on pianos a lot, and that's a rare thing. Piano players very rarely get to hang out with one another or play together because of the nature of the instrument. But with it's
bass players, we don't play together.
Yeah, and with Paul, I did. I occasionally go over to his place, or we'd find a piano someplace and trade licks and that kind of thing. And he was a pal. I was thinking earlier today, actually, that what I probably liked most about Paul is that we both turned into 9-year-olds when we were together. And that was a great feeling. He managed to bring that same level of youthful exuberance to just about everything he did, including his friend making and his piano playing.
And mischievousness. You know, he loved to be a joker. You know, practical jokes. And
Puns.
And he was very gullible too. You know, he's very innocent soul of being, and you know, like, why not get totally naked here and honest? I mean, I remember Cecil Taylor, his hero, having Paul deliver a kilo of cocaine in New York for him, you know, in a cab. It was like, here, Paul, take this package. I'll see you down in the village in about an hour, okay? Paul, yeah, Cecil, sure, yeah, absolutely, you know. I wasn't there, but Paul, you know, that. Yeah, I knew, you know, 'cause I knew Cecil too. I played in his band, and you know, and Cecil was the most wonderful, generous, hateful, spiteful person you ever want to meet. You know, he could be amazing, and I could see Cecil doing that. So that's didn't witness it. Paul told me, but I'm sure it's a true story.
Wow, there was something I didn't expect to hear this afternoon.
I got a few more too.
Oh, I'm sure you do, but we should check to see if the statute of limitations has run out on any of those adventures. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Thank
Everybody,
you.
Lisle Ellis. So, I guess we have some more stuff going on. Is Aidan available? Oh, you're going to play some video. Okay, so apparently we're going to see some video. The first video will be from George Lewis, who has kindly sent along something for us to share. Here we go.
Hello, Vancouver. I'm George Lewis, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people there who I know. And I'm just here to add my voice to yours, the many who are celebrating the life of Paul Plimley, remembering his special genius, his open and engaging personality, his brilliant musicianship, his generosity of spirit, his extreme energy, I know you know about that one, and his love of life and music. So I won't talk for very long because I imagine that so many of you have so much more to say about him, but I think we can all agree that Paul was a mold-breaking kind of guy. I mean, we won't see the like of him for many years, at least not in this life. But we can all say there's a little bit of Paul in all of us, you know, like stardust.
Randy! Hi, May! We could always hear Paul's musical greeting across the room as we enter a party. Paul was always a joy to see and to talk to.
When I met Paul, it was kind of a rekindled bond. Always full of laughter and rapid-fire repartee of sort of beer-spitting puns actually happened to us. I first met him in the 1970s at Western Front. I just moved back to town. I was at the Creative Music Studio with Carl Berger. Came to Vancouver, was living in Victoria for a while, and heard there's all these jam sessions at Western Front. So I took my Appalachian Mountain dulcimer, electrified, down to the front, and that's where I met Paul. Some bass. Ken Newby was playing bassoon. Paul was playing vibes then, and a bunch of other folks. These were the early sessions, very, very early sessions that developed into the new orchestra workshop. And then I found out that Paul and my family had a relationship. Paul's dad and Paul's family and my family were both in the car business on Kingsway.
I first met Paul at 2001 Sound Travels Global Exchange at the Planetarium in Vancouver, performing via internet with musicians in around the world, such as Tokyo, New York, San Diego, Melbourne, Toulouse, and Vienna. I was still a rookie in the free improv, having only played before with you. And also Frank
Grotowski, right?
Yeah, Grotowski. That's
the
right.
Jazz Festival.
Yeah. Musically though, Paul and I just hit it off. We really clicked, and also our friendship was born through that performance.
Interesting because it's kind of independent of me. So it's really nice. Fate would put Paul and myself on stage only a very few times. We didn't play together that much, although our friendship was great. I think the first time was actually, it was really quite memorable for me. It was with Mia Masaoka on Koto. It was a really interesting concert.
Yeah. In 2004, Paul and I recorded our duo improv CD called Ume. You produced it and released it in 2005. This CD really took my instrument, the Chinese zheng, into some very new places. And when playing with Paul, he did not try to fit what the zheng was good at or even what Chinese culture was. He just directly hooked it to my heart. We hit it in the very personal and deep level, and that CD came out really, really amazing. And I still remember reviews gave us a lot of compliments and ear wide open, something like that.
Well, that was the thing, because Paul he wasn't worried about where you came from. He was just listening to the sounds and listening to the music and plugged straight in.
Right. And he's so personal.
Yeah.
And in 2006, and he joined us at the Meihan Art Ensemble.
Well, yeah, we did a tour of China, which was pretty amazing, that May put together. And very few groups at that time were touring China, and we actually got paid for it, which was pretty amazing. Let's see, Mark Armanini was on bass with us. Yes. And we were treated like rock stars. It was a huge hit. We'd walk in and kids would be screaming and yelling just as we're walking on stage.
Yeah, that was all mostly because of Paul.
Well, yeah, it was. No one had ever seen in China. I mean, when people play in China, it's very formal, very kind of conservative, classical conservative style. And then Paul hits the stage, and everybody's mind is blown. Like, what is going on? What is he doing? And he's so full of energy and just so animated. Just the kids went nuts, just crazy.
Yeah, traveling with Paul was always fun, and I remember that same year we traveled to Victoriaville.
Oh yeah, Festival de Musique Actuelle de Victoriaville in Quebec.
Yeah, that was a good show.
Yeah, with Coop was on sax
and the flute.
Yeah, and that was really amazing. In fact, we had incredible sound.
Yeah, I think after those two tours, we really, as a band, we were smooth and just happening every show.
Everything was just really amazing. We did some really interesting experimental stuff. Took music in different places that you wouldn't expect. And it was just always fun. And with those kind of folks, of course it is. So we didn't see Paul often, especially in the last 10 years, because, we're in Tennessee most of the time. But May and Paul recorded again in December 2020.
Yeah, right in the
and these pieces have yet to be released, but I went there just to help May out, and Paul sort of said, hey, why don't we sit down and play a piece? So I sat down, impromptu. It wasn't my gig. I was just there. And Paul and I just played a piece together, which May recorded on her phone. And that's on YouTube, if you can catch it. It's called Precognition Blues. And it was just amazing to reconnect to Paul again after all these years.
Yeah. Most musicians describe Paul as a person who had big ears, but in fact Paul was much more. He was such a big personality and experienced life in the big ways. Whenever he is now, I'm sure he's being there in the fullest way possible.
Paul was is special. He's one of the very few people that really got my spirit, and I know got your spirit, and I think we both got his. It's like, hey, Paul, how are you, man? Good to see you. God, I love you, man. Miss you.
Love you.
And in case you don't know, that
May.
We could always hear Paul's musical grating across the room as
there we go. That was the great multi-instrumentalist Randy Rain-Rouche and his partner Mehan, who are longtime friends and collaborators with Paul. I guess that's it, I think, for the video submissions. One more, Henry Kaiser. We don't have
Well,
sound.
I'm sad to report, if you haven't heard, my good friend, the Canadian pianist Paul Plimley, died last May. He was a good friend of mine. I met him in 1977. We were on at least 4 or 5 records together, and we played together over the years, many times in all those years. He was an amazing piano player. He had a close connection and friendship with Cecil Taylor. He would assist Cecil in workshops with orchestra pieces, and he's one of the few pianists who's played piano on a Cecil Taylor record that was a large ensemble piece. Amazing. And, well, let's see. We made a record a long time ago called Passwords. It's out of print now, and I just put it back on Bandcamp for $1. And it's with Paul and the wonderful cellist Danielle De Gratola and I. Paul played on the first Yo Miles album back in 1998. We had a really good time with Wadada Leo Smith making that record. There's the Starbreak Splatterlight, an album with 2 drummers, Weasel Walter, Lucas Ligeti, and me playing guitar and bass, and Paul playing piano. That's a real favorite of mine that most people have never noticed. And then last year, 3 old pals, John Oswald, the great Canadian alto sax player who I've known for just a little longer than Paul, we did a trio album with Paul playing vibes called At One Time, which is a tribute to Cecil Taylor. So now, as I often find myself doing, too often nowadays, I'd like to play a guitar requiem for my friend Paul Plimley. I'll take this really cool Verso Cosmo guitar, sheet metal. Look, it's sheet metal, walnut neck. It's amazing. It's a really unusual guitar, really interesting design. Verso Cosmo guitar. And, well, I'll plug it in and we'll see what comes out. Requiem for my friend Paul Plimley.
Thank you for your tender mercies. So I'm going to introduce this person who has just sidled up behind me. There is a word that doesn't get used as often as it used to in the 16th century. But it's a good word, and it's useful, and it's actually accurate here. The word is helpmeet. A helpmeet is not necessarily someone you're married to that does your bidding and cleans up after you. Your helpmeet is essentially the Watson to someone's Holmes. Because Holmes couldn't be who he was without Watson there, for one thing, knitting up the bullet wounds and all that sort of thing. and being a musician is no different. I'd like to introduce you to Paul's companion, his helpmeet, his good friend, his engineer, his tech, his tax person. He designed his website and put together the celebration we're all attending. Please welcome Victoria Gibson.
Oh, thanks a lot. Well, this is it. This is the ending remarks here. So you can go out into the exhibit hall and you can look at all the installation that I did. This was curated by Paul through the years. He just stashed everything from gigs that he liked in his basement. So with the help of Daniel Tugas and Arthur Delahook and a couple of other people, we went through the basement and we dug out all of this stuff. And now I have cataloged it, and I'm in the process of scanning it, and I'm submitting it to the Capilano University Archives. All the paper and posters and everything will be available for everyone to look at. And there's posters there with QR codes and that sort of thing on there. You can check it out. It's been great to hear everybody talk about Paul. Thank you so much, everyone who came and spoke. And thank you, everyone, for hanging in here and watching this and being a part of it. It's really important to honor people in our lifetimes who have made such a difference. And Paul made a difference, touched so many hearts, whether with his music or just buying a coffee off someone. Paul would touch your heart. And it was his specialty. He said it once he was writing, I go through his computer looking for stuff to say and stuff to show, and it said, his characteristics are he was kind. And I think that was his number one characteristic. He was kind to everyone. He was understanding. He gave you the benefit of the doubt. And it was great to work with him because so many people don't understand that I'm not 100% neuronormative. And I do odd things sometimes, and I say the wrong thing a lot. So I'm trying not to do that now. So Paul was very understanding, and he took the gifts that I gave him, and he took it way farther than I could ever do by myself. But, when I first met him, he would talk about taking me to New York. But what happened really was I got a gig in New York and hired him in Lisle. So, that was at the Center for Performance Research in Brooklyn, actually. That was a 3 nights gig that I had there. But it's just been great working with Paul. And every aspect, every time I see him play, it's just the best music ever. And I always am going to miss that. I don't know really if there's any kind of replacement for the kind of thing that Paul could just make flow from him like just a stream of music. It was just wonderful to behold. And I'm sure all of you have experienced that in person. So we're really missing Paul, but we have to keep on going, and everything's going to be okay. One of the last things that Paul was talking to me about was his CD project that he did, Everything in Stages. And he said he really believed in everything in stages. And Ron was talking about that earlier. He was saying you have to walk with death. Well, I ride a motorcycle. You get pretty used to the idea after you've encountered a few Ford Escalades. Paul was super brave. He always was positive right up to the end, and he was ready, and he decided to go. He picked his own moment. He picked his own time. He did it his way. And he was accepting. He wasn't down. He didn't make everybody feel guilty or bad or anything, and he doesn't want you to mourn and feel bad now. When he was talking about his celebration of life to me, he said, I want it to be somewhere beautiful. And I thought, well, the Roundhouse is pretty nice, but I don't know. So I put all his posters. I made it beautiful for him. And all his memories are there. So that's beautiful. And then I drove his car today, and it conked out in the Roundhouse outside. It was working perfectly fine. I parked it across the street, and then I just brought it over to empty it out. It will not start. I imagine that after this is over, it'll probably just kick right over as soon as I load it up. But maybe I'll have to call, who knows. It's just been a day for me, but I really enjoyed hearing everyone speak. I really enjoyed seeing so many familiar faces, especially after COVID, not seeing everybody for a long time. So now we can just go out into the exhibit hall and have a fun time and have a party. This is supposed to be a celebration of Paul's life. So let's celebrate. Let's have a good time. Yeah. And there's some very rare recordings from Paul's collection of Paul that I brought. These are some that Paul only had one copy of. So I brought a whole bunch of stuff that is really difficult to find, if you can find it at all. And so Don Chow is going to be playing things for us, and you can make requests, do whatever you want, but it's all Paul's music. Okay, have a good time.